I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners to order for Tuesday, May 22nd, 2018. And the first item of business is adjustments to the agenda, and I will note that we added an emergency business item under item 4A, and it was posted yesterday on the internet for those that want to look at the information behind it. Any other adjustments to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll also note that Commissioner Gary Williams is excused today. So with that, we'll move to item 2, which is public comment. Is there anyone signed up for public comment today? It's the first time, I think, in about a year. Wow. Seeing no public comment, any commissioners' remonstrance or response for other issues? Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to make note, I'm sure you all saw it and were part of it, but yesterday was the 20th anniversary of the Thurston shooting and pretty incredible gathering at the park right across the street from Thurston High School last night. And it is pretty, I think it's pretty eye-opening, especially for the students that attend now, not knowing that or they knew the memorial was there, but not really maybe getting a real clear understanding that when you look at all the shootings that are going on in high schools, this was one of the first worst ones. And now, of course, nobody mentions it because it's not even close to being the worst. But it was a great event. And on top of that, I also wanted to just, speaking of Thurston High School, and I got to get back to things that are really important, so golf. I just wanted to congratulate, I sent him a note, and Ty Garner is a really great kid, and he's a junior at Thurston High School. He won the 5A state championship, and so congratulations to Ty. I will tell you, his new swing coach is none other than the great Brian Henniger. And boy, did it make, from a sophomore year to junior year, whew, you can tell that things have changed dramatically for him. And so hopefully he will follow him. Speaking of local, University of Oregon's Aaron Wise, who won the Byron Nelson Classic over the weekend at 21 years old. And nice year so far, $2.5 million. Congratulations to the 21-year-old who left, by the way, after his sophomore year at University of Oregon as the NCAA champion. As well as the University of Oregon was also the team champion that year, but Aaron was actually the NCAA individual champion, and they're already giving him comparisons, and I hope they don't do this too much, to Ben Crenshaw. So that's pretty wild. But anyway, I just wanted to make note of that, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other remonstrance from the commissioners? Seeing none, then we're moving right along to emergency business. Item 4A, which is Order 1805-2208 in a matter of approving a 5-year renewable lease with Weyerhaeuser Company for the Sheriff's Office radio tower site on Harness Mountain and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the lease. And I think we've got Chief Deputy Cliff Harold.
Thank you, Chair Bozovich. I'm very much expecting Jim Chaney from County Counsel's office to burst through a door any minute now and rescue me. But I will stall for a minute to give him time to get down here. This is a site that has been a very important part of our radio network for years. As you can see in the materials, we acquired it back in 2005, but we never exchanged paperwork directly with Weyerhaeuser, who owns the site, and it kind of fell off of everyone's radar until 2017, when it was brought to our attention that it had fallen off the radar. So the Sheriff's Office is especially grateful. Jim Chaney has spent a lot of time and energy working on this, helping us maintain the relationship with Weyerhaeuser and also make sure that we're have a fair and reasonable deal with them to continue to have access to this site for our radio network. With the exception of those comments, so and not seeing Jim burst through a door yet.
For my education, where is Harness Mountain? Is it?
I brought the expert, Brian Gregg, our radio network coordinator, recently acquired from the City of Eugene radio shop. And he can tell you how to get there because I couldn't get there.
Good morning. How's it going?
Good morning.
So I actually brought a picture, if that helps. We have Cottage Grove right here, right off of I-5. And you actually go through Cottage Grove, and Harness Mountain is just past the border of the county, actually into the next county.
So it's in Douglas County?
Yes, and it
Yeah, so I didn't
backfills.
recognize the name, that's why I was,
Yes, yeah.
How do you pronounce the name of the mountain?
It's Harness Mountain?
Harness Mountain?
Yes, yeah. Any questions?
no, thank you. Appreciate that. I'm sure that's a very helpful link in our Southern County radio coverage.
It is, and Brian could explain even more, it's an important link in our Southwest 7 project, the multiple county project that someday may continue to grow in interoperability to our southern neighbors.
Yeah, I went up to hike the falls, Prindle and Spirit and Moon Falls this past weekend in that direction, and you definitely do not have cell phone coverage out there.
Indeed.
So having radio coverage, I'm pretty sure, is pretty important. So appreciate that. So any questions for staff on the lease, I should say? Seeing and hearing none, I'll entertain a motion. Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to move approval of Order 1805-2208 in the matter of approving a 5-year renewable lease with Weyerhaeuser Company for the Sheriff's Office radio tower site on Harness Mountain and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the lease.
Second.
Thank you. So it's been moved by Commissioner Lycan, seconded by Commissioner Farr. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 4-0 with Commissioner Williams excused. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So that gets us down to item 5, which is an employee introduction. And I will
Thanks,
turn it
Mr.
over to the
Chair. I'll
administrator.
invite, Karen Gaffney, our Director of Health and Human Services, and Carla Tazamel, our new Developmental Disabilities Manager. We've done this a couple times here now. We have a number of new faces in Health and Human Services, and so we wanted to just bring them to you. Carla's got great background and experience here in the state of Oregon and in our community, and we're really excited to have her on board leading developmental disabilities. And I'll ask Karen just to share a little bit more about Carla's background and the process they went through to select her for this important position.
Thank you, Chair Bozovich and Commissioners. I'm truly thrilled to be able to introduce you to Carla Tazamel, our new Developmental Disabilities Manager. I was mentioning before the meeting that DD is actually the one section of Health and Human Services that's located in this building, so she's your on-site connection to Health and Human Services here. She started with us in the beginning of April and comes to us with a strong background working with families and children with diverse needs, having spent 15 years with the Oregon Department of Human Services in their child welfare program. During her time with DHS, Carla worked as a case manager, a supervisor, and the post-adoption services manager, and that is really responsible for ensuring the needs of the many children and families that the agency works with, including children and parents with developmental disabilities. Prior to accepting our DD manager position, Carla also served as the Central Regional Manager for the Department of Transportation at the state, the Driver and Motor Vehicles Division, where she provided direction and leadership to a region that included 12 offices that spanned 5 counties. So she's a very experienced manager and really brings that experience to us here in Health and Human Services. In addition to her educational background, she has a bachelor's degree in social work from Pacific University and a master's of social work with an emphasis in administration and management from Portland State University. And for me, as we looked at selecting a new manager for developmental disabilities, it really was important to us to make sure we had someone who really had a passion for working with that particular community and a passion to serve in general. And Carla absolutely brings that. I know in talking with her through the interview process, a real driver for her was coming back to the human services field after her time with DMV. So we're thrilled to have her bring that experience and expertise to the work that we have in really growing our developmental disabilities services program. I'll turn it over to Carla if you have anything you want to add.
I just want to say thank you for bringing me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm thrilled, honestly, and the staff have been fabulous. I've been really impressed with how dedicated and hardworking and committed the employees are to serving this particular population. And as Karen mentioned, I'm really excited to be able to return to the field of human services. I think that this is an excellent opportunity, and I appreciated the opportunity recently to talk about the budgetary needs. I think that the community here is really growing and the needs are really growing, and I look forward to being involved and seeing how we can expand services to meet those needs, while also, of course, maintaining an eye on fiscal responsibility. So I'm thrilled. So thank you.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Well, welcome, and thank you so much for your remarks this morning. I'm interested in knowing whether other counties besides Lane County, or maybe not besides Lane County, but other counties, do they put general fund money into their developmental disabilities programs?
My understanding, and I've only been here a short time, but just some brief conversations I've had, is some counties do and some counties do not.
Okay.
It depends.
How difficult would it be to, this is the fun part of coming to board meetings. People ask you questions, and then you don't know the answer, but you kind of know the answer. And then they say, could you send us an email in which you just give us what you know on this?
Okay.
I mean, like, are there 5 counties and, you know?
You can certainly reach out and
Yeah, and if you could send an email to the board, that would further inform us of what counties are able to put money in. The second question I had was that we hear the phrase unmet needs a lot in the social service arena. And to me, it's like the unemployment rate. It's either 100% or 0. Like, I either have a job or I don't have a job. And so unmet needs, maybe I tried to access services and I got them. So now there were no unmet needs. Or I tried to access services, I didn't get them, my needs were unmet. Is there any way to measure what unmet needs there are in the developmental disabilities arena? Like the number of phone calls that aren't returned, or the number of people that aren't helped, or?
You know, that's a good question. I think that my understanding is it's really an entitlement program. So anybody who's eligible, their needs are met in terms of eligibility for the program. But there is certainly a growing base of people who are becoming eligible. And as a result of that, having employees who have really full caseloads makes it difficult to maybe make those connections with the people that they are serving as frequently as would be helpful to the individuals they're serving. And so I think in terms of measuring that, we can certainly measure caseload growth over time. I don't, of course, have that information right now, and I think that's something as we get more stronger data.
And there won't be a follow-up, don't worry.
I think that that's something that we would definitely be paying attention to.
Okay. Thank you so much, and welcome.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozovich. You know, this is just kind of a personal question. I first met Andrea at the Mental Health Advisory Committee meeting, and I'm presuming that you will be attending the MHAC meetings?
Yes, I will be.
Right on. That's good. Look forward to seeing you there.
So I just want to say welcome, and, you know, I have, my stepbrother is developmentally disabled, so, and I've got a good friend, Bob Bergman, who's developmentally disabled, and so I have a great appreciation for this population, their needs, and I also have some fairly close ties with the Pearl Buck Center. That kind of, you know, brings me to, you know, eventually a conversation we might want to have of how we push the pendulum back just a little bit on closed workshops. I think they just went too far with this last set of legislation, because there is a population that benefits from that closed workshop environment, and you can no longer bring somebody into that program. So it's kind of ending by attrition. And yeah, I think it's when we talk about need, you know, and the fact that it's a growing population and there's a need, that's one of the places I think with some fine tuning could serve that. You know, it's kind of like, you know, there was too many closed workshops, and now suddenly it's like there's going to be none. There's some place in the middle that was right. So as we think about legislative session coming up, we might want to look for some ways to tune that legislation a little bit. and see if we can provide a compromise somewhere in the middle, because there really is a population that is much more comfortable. And I think Pearl Buck had a video a couple of years ago at one of their breakfasts, and one of their clients was talking about how much she loves coming to work there because she's free to be me. I'm free to be me, as she put it, where she can, be a little bit crazy, have little outbursts, and stuff like that. And it doesn't impact stuff, whereas having a mainstream isn't quite as easy for some of those individuals, because we've got some great employers that are starting to hire some of these folks around town, and we've made a lot of inroads, but it's difficult. So I look forward to working with you on that particular issue. So welcome, and as you can tell, there's some energy around this. So our board's kind of, you'd be surprised how deep some of the board runs here when it comes to some of these issues. So I look forward to working with you, and you got some great staff down there. You guys, they do good work. So, and you've got some great management above you. So,
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
so welcome, and thank you for joining Lane County's team. And I like the fact that it sounds like you meet some of our strategic plan thoughts around, passionate for the work and looking to provide solutions. So, welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Carla.
So that brings us to item 6, which is our consent calendar, and these are items that are considered routine by the Board of Commissioners and will be enacted in one motion in the form listed. And if there are any need to discuss the items, they would have been pulled earlier under adjustments to the agenda. And if you want details on these, you can go to our agenda online and click View Material on any of the items. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
So it's been moved by Commissioner Lyken, seconded by Commissioner Farr to approve the May 22nd, 2018 consent calendar. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 4-0 with Commissioner Williams excused. That brings us down to item 7, county administration announcements. Mr. Mokohiski.
Mr. Chair, I have a few announcements, but I'm happy to hold those because we have Mr. Beck here, and then we have our Human Services staff here for items 7B and 8A. So if you want to take those up, I can hold till after those.
Sure, we'll go ahead and do that. So why don't we move on to item 7B, which is National Forest presentation on the 2017 fire season. And we have Mr. Beck, Forest Supervisor. Use up the PowerPoint.
Well, good morning, and thanks for having me here today. I just have a few slides, PowerPoint slides, to go over the 2017 fire season that we all went through in all the communities, and then tell you a little bit about what we're really leaning into this year.
If it's easier for you just to sit at the computer and steer, the mic there will work too if you turn it towards you.
Thank you. That mic was a little bit low for me.
Yeah.
Again, I'm Tracy Beck. I'm the Forest Supervisor of the Willamette National Forest, your national forest right here near Eugene. I've been here for 3 years. This is my 38th year in the U.S. Forest Service, my 40th fire season. I'm still a red-carded qualified firefighter, and I will remain so until I can't do it anymore. Okay, this is a satellite photo probably taken in early August prior to Eagle Creek fire that took off in the Columbia River Gorge. All the red dots are intense heat signatures. That big conglomeration of red dots down in the left. The bottom left side is of course the Chetco Bar fire. That was the biggest fire in the state last year. And then all those heat signatures more in the high Cascades going north are on the Willamette. So last year
What's the white?
The white in and around us in Oregon is smoke. So those heat signatures were generating lots of smoke that we had to breathe pretty much from late July to late September last year.
On the left is fog, but what's on the right?
Okay, that would be cloud cover over eastern Oregon. Yep. So last year, last year we burned about 70,000 acres. In the last 20 years combined, we burned about 55,000 acres in wildfire. So it was a year well out of the norm. When you look at the burn severity over the forest, and over 70% of that 73,000 acres that burned was in designated wilderness, mostly in the high Cascades. Well, all in the high Cascades for us. If you look at the percent by severity, we only had about 5% burn at a high severity, and that was mostly the mountain hemlock and lodgepole pine in the high Cascades. 31% in moderate, then 47 in low, and 16% in unburned. So in those areas, of course, fires do burn in a mosaic, and so there weren't a lot of salvage opportunities yet. We're watching for those, but it appears that we had a lot of good underburning. It didn't kill the trees. We do have a lot of roadside hazard tree salvage going on right now. We've sold a bunch of contracts, and we're going to get that work done this year so we can get the public into these areas safely. So the biggest single solution to all this is more active management and more burning. I would have brought my fire management officer today, but he's out burning today. This is a good burn day, and we're doing a lot of acres in and around the communities of West Fir, Oak Ridge, McKinsey Bridge, and Detroit. So you'll see smoke in the air probably over this next week until we get some weather through to help put those prescribed fires out. Another thing that's happening at the national level is we're really looking at our environmental analysis and decision-making. This has the attention of the interim chief of the Forest Service. Environmental analysis just takes too long and costs too much. We need to put more money into implementation. So we're really, we're excited about this effort. It's going to change some of our handbooks and some of our policies to give us greater flexibility in using categorical exclusion, compressing timelines to complete projects, and we'll see more acres per decision. That's what we need. On the Willamette Forest, we have a really good 5-year plan. We've generally been at about 70 million board feet a year that we offer and award to local mills. And since I've been here, we've climbed to 80 million this year, and we've always exceeded our targets. Our target is 80 million this year. We're hoping to do 85 million. And some of the ways we can do that is partner up with Oregon Department of Forestry and ODF&W to help us implement these projects. We're also in...
Commissioner Leiken.
Sure. So quick question. So the slide before, now, is that done administratively? That does not have to be, that's not from a congressional act. That's done more from the administrative side. Is that correct?
Correct. We're dealing with it from the policy
Very
side.
good. Thank you.
Yep. We're updating our policies.
Excellent. Thank you.
Again, on the Willamette, we've really substantially increased our project area size, so we're getting more acres and more volume per decision. And we're also decreasing the amount of time it takes us to reach a decision, which has in the past taken 4 and 5 years to reach a decision. Now we're going no more than 2 years. And then I'll leave it with, are we ready for fire season 2018? We're definitely ready. We've staffed up. We have 3 initial attack fire crews out there ready to go, numerous engines. Everything's in place in fire leadership. We just consolidated dispatch into a centralized dispatch in Springfield. So our dispatch covers all of our resources from the southern Willamette all the way to the Gorge, out to Astoria, and the whole coast. So it's the Siuslaw National Forest, BLM, Bureau of Land Management, Willamette National Forest, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the refuges, and we would welcome Oregon Department of Forestry someday if they want to join us. So at this point, I'd just like to throw it open to any questions.
Questions from the board? So I've got a few.
Sure.
And first, I'm going to apologize because I know you're just happen to be the representative of the Forest Service that's sitting here in front of us, so these aren't personally directed. But last year, there was an equal number of starts on ODF protected land versus U.S. Forest Service protected land, yet the acreage burned was, I can't remember what, 90% U.S. Forest Service versus like 10% ODF. I can't remember the exact percentage, but it was somewhere in 80-20, 90-10. It was a surprising statistic, and leads to the question of, as we saw the impact on communities, some areas that had complete shutdowns of their tourism industry for months at a time. The economic impact was incredible from the U.S. forest fires. And in fact, the economic impact even on ODF protected forests, I believe it was, I'm trying to remember the fire down in South Douglas County that wasn't detected because smoke from the Chetco Bar.
Horse Prairie.
Yeah, Horse Prairie wasn't detected early because the Chetco Bar smoke screened it from the smoke cameras. So, and as you look at the Chetco Bar fire in particular, there was a fire that we knew where the start was, and it was tracked for weeks and weeks and weeks at less than 5 acres for a couple weeks, and then less than 10, less than 50, and was just let burn. And I look at how that happens, and it happens through the U.S. Forest Service directives. And I guess so. Some of the questions I have about that is: are those directives administrative from the executive branch, or are they legislative from Congress? Because that's kind of where we need to change some of our law.
When you're out on the ground fighting fire, you're making pretty tough decisions, Chairman Bosevich. I can't speak to Chetco Bar. I know there's an investigation going on, but when you look at the statistics, I don't know what the final numbers were last year, but generally we're at 98% success in our initial attack. That's what ODF strives for. Last year was out of the norm. British Columbia burnt 4 million acres. We had fires going on in Washington, Oregon, Northern California, Idaho, and Montana, all competing for those resources. The way the storms rolled through, the high Cascades got lit up. So a lot of our fires were 4 and 5 miles hike in. We jumped a lot of fires. We repelled a lot of fires. We were successful up until late July. Then we got overwhelmed and there were no resources left. If ODF would have had more horse pastures fires, they would have been in the same boat. We'd have had to bring in probably out-of-state teams to staff some of those fires because they can only staff two teams. I had 4 teams operating on on the Willamette Forest pretty much all summer. So it was a summer out of the norm. As a firefighter, you don't remember every fire you initial attack and you have success. You remember everyone that it goes project.
Yeah, but one of the, because initial attack in the Forest Service is man initial attack, not, and particularly in wilderness, there's a prohibition against aerial attack.
No, we used air resources right from the start.
Then that begs the question of why the Chetco Bar fire was monitored for so long versus attacked when it was in the Kalmiopsis wilderness. There's actual directives that state you guys will let a lightning cause fire burn in a wilderness.
We can make that decision, but we don't take that lightly. And I did not make that decision in June or July last year until we got overwhelmed and we had some starts that we didn't have resources left.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of brings the question as to, and this is probably where we as a political body need to lobby for, one of the most effective tools that ODF employs is their seats.
Is what?
Their seats. Their
Seats,
yeah. There's single engineer tankers. For initial attack on a single tree lightning strike fire, and it's under an acre, there's nothing that beats that to get out there quick and get right on it. And having multiple seats available to them, and it seems like there needs to be maybe a little bit of we need to make a push for you guys to have those kind of resources available.
Absolutely.
Where you're not having to, hike into 4 miles. And then we also need to address the whole issue of the Forest Service's policies about tearing out roads and road removal. As I comment, and this is Siuslaw Forest, so it's not you guys, but the Indian Creek Landscape Plan they put forward down in the Siuslaw National Forest was basically a plan to remove roadways that would be potential firefighting. So
Sure.
Needing to hike in 4 miles sometimes is because we've either let roads go or we've actually made a decision to close roads in areas, and those policies also need to change. And I'm kind of looking for, do we make that push through the administration? Do we make that push through Congress? And that's why are the directives, the actual, as I look at the Forest Service directives, like Series 5100, which deals with wilderness, and it actually has the 5131.4 that says you'll let lightning cause fires go. Is that an administrative directive, or is that a statutory directive that comes from legislation?
That'd be an administrative that I can waive
Okay.
and did.
So that's
Frequently.
kind of, so then I know where to start pushing for change in some of those, because one of the things that it amazes me we even have that policy sometimes. I mean, it might work for some of the wilderness in Alaska where it's millions of acres, but some of our wildernesses here are, they're not uniformly shaped. There's interweaving of private lands,
Sure.
And making that, having a national policy about, letting a lightning strike go in July in Oregon seems to be a little bit, not applicable, where it might be okay up in the Songus or somewhere up in Alaska.
Sure. Or if you get a start in late September and you have a weather system coming in, do you do anything? Probably not.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's time of year is everything.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
if it was September, it might be great for an understory fire.
Sure.
Yeah. Whereas, or even if it was a start in May, where the forest is still damp enough and the energy levels aren't that high in the forest, that might actually be fine. But late July, it just seemed, it made me shake my head as I watched that whole fire develop. And I watched fires pretty carefully in the summertime, having the West Lane district.
Sure.
So just, like I said, nothing personal, but you just happen to be the person wearing green in front of us today.
I can appreciate that. And, something else you can push for that we saw very effective last year was the scooper planes. Planes that go down onto the reservoirs, fill up, and come back and drop water. Boy, those things really had a lot of impact on our fires. But then as soon as they'd start making impact, they'd get pulled off to a higher priority somewhere else.
Yeah, so we just need more of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not one of those people that's pushing for the 747.
No.
I figure you guys know
Not in
what
this
tools you
country.
need. Yeah.
It works, but not here.
Yeah. So, and the scooper planes, and then there's a secondary issue there about pushing the Corps to make sure reservoirs stay full and everything else.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's a whole other issue that with another branch of government, which I'm trying to deal with because they've got their hydraulic models for the Willamette system that they put together actually were finalized in the 60s based on the 40 years of precip data prior to that, and they haven't modernized their modeling since then. So there's about 40 years of precipitation data,
Sure.
the changing climate and all that they're not really, they're doing flood control based on the way it was in the 60s versus flood control on the way precipitation is today.
It's changed. Yep.
And they are constantly not filling reservoirs like Detroit Lake, which are an important resource for you guys in firefighting. If they're not
It was.
full enough, then you can't use a scooper. So there's a whole other issue going on there, not to mention the recreational economic impact of not having a reservoir full, just like smoke impacts. It really hurts our tourism economy, which is supposed to be replacing our timber economy that we used to have in this state. So I appreciate you coming in. Any other questions? And now I generated a couple. Commissioner Lake and then Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, and I would like to kind of ask, because with your experience in the Forest Service, I know you said 3 years here, but 38 years total?
Yes, sir.
So the Good Neighbor policy, a Good Neighbor program, so it's actually not that old. And maybe just kind of get your thoughts on maybe your experience with the Good Neighbor program here in Oregon.
Sure.
And because what I do read is that it's really looking pretty successful in Idaho. And maybe just to kind of get your overall thoughts on how you think it's doing here, and maybe some improvements that you see that could be made, especially given the fact that there's significant interest in the Congress on a farm bill again, and it's my understanding the forest management side is going to be part of this. Now I know it failed in the House for other reasons, but I think there's a real shot in the Senate on working with some of this stuff. So maybe I'd like to just get your thoughts on your opinion, because you're in the middle of this and you're working this, and just overall how you feel it's working in Oregon and what kind of improvements you think, because with your experience, I'd be very interested to hear from you what kind of improvements you think that could be made.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner, for the question. The 2014 Farm Bill gave us the authority to enter into Good Neighbor Authority projects. Well, we'll be entering into 3 Good Neighbor Authority projects this year with Oregon Department of Forestry and Oregon Department of Fishing and Wildlife. What we can do is give them essentially a timber sale to go out and prepare, advertise, put the package together, the contract, advertise it, compete it, and award it, and administer it. There's a minimum bid that we accept through an appraisal process, and they get to keep the bid premium. So on the Willamette, we generally put sales out for a minimum bid, and what we're seeing is a lot of competition, and it's minimum bid times 3. So it generates a lot of funding. So Good Neighbor Authority projects are a way for us to increase our capacity. Like I said, we're at 80 million this year. We're probably going to end up awarding 85 million because of those 3 projects that Oregon Department of Forestry is really helping us with. They have a capacity issue, but they can hire easier than we can. So they can get more capacity, and we're starting these projects out pretty small for seed money to grow that into the future. So I just see it as a real opportunity to probably increase our program by at least 20%. So by 2020, we could be up to 100 million.
I appreciate that, and especially considering the Good Neighbor Policy program is fairly new. So I'm glad to hear you comment about that. And of course, we work closely with Link out in West Lane. Yeah.
Yep.
And I have a lot of respect for Nancy Hirsch and her work with ODF too. So I'm glad to hear that, because when I've read about what's going on with the Good Neighbor program, immediately Idaho pops up quite a bit. Sure. Now, granted, they don't have BLM lands. I mean, it's Forest Service lands. So they probably have a much better opportunity to connect that way. So I'm glad to hear that, because I think there should be a continued increased push with Congress on if there's ways that the Good Neighbor program can be improved. It was interesting, I was listening to the debate between the three major contenders for the Republican gubernatorial, and the only one who really talked about that and grasped it was Representative Bueller. The other two didn't really quite understand what the Good Neighbor Program was about, so I was actually glad to hear him talk about that, because I think it's what you were just talking about, what's going to happen here, you know, the potential that could happen here in the next 2 to 4 years is actually very exciting, and I really appreciate that. So I would just continue to encourage you and work in that route. I know, like I said, I think there's an opportunity in the Senate. They've got to regroup in the House, obviously, but in the Senate, and to hopefully make something where it can be potentially improved to make your work even easier working with the state. So appreciate your comments and your answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Sorensen.
Thank you. Could you put that slide up there that that was the one that at least caught my eye about the intensity level of the different fires or the fires this year? Yeah.
This one?
Yeah. You had tell me what the 5% represents.
Okay, 5% means that it was pretty much total tree mortality. You know, crown fire, those trees aren't coming back. So
those trees were all killed?
Yes.
Those
And
nearly 3,700 acres?
Correct, out of 73,000,
Yeah.
over 73,000.
So 5% of the total acres damaged, 3,700 were completely obliterated and killed.
Correct, and that was mostly in the High Cascades.
Yeah. Now, do we have any way of knowing what that number is routinely, if there's such a thing as an average or a 5-year average, or comparing that number with what ODFW does on the lower elevation forest lands?
Every fire is different, and it burns under a different weather condition. The weather conditions are generally the most, you know, the weather dictates, and fuels dictates what's actually going to happen.
But was that number, 5% number, was that higher or lower than you said last year was a really awful year? That was my translation of hearing about British Columbia. I know they had to bring in crews from Australia on western British Columbia fires, but they just had really all over the Northwest and Southwest Canada. They had a horrible forest fire year. But what I'm trying to get at is, in terms of the most damaged acres, is that that 5% number, is that a high number?
Based on fires I've been in the past, no. You know, if you look at the Berry Point fire that burned down on the Fremont Wainema a number of years ago, that probably was in the neighborhood of 60% high severity over the 90,000 acres that actually burned in one fire. So based on what I saw from last year, these are typical numbers compared to what happened on the Umpqua National Forest, and then even the Rogue River Siskiyou. Those numbers are pretty similar, because generally the fires started in high elevations and then burned down.
Okay. And there's been kind of a theme here. Well, the Forest Service doesn't put out the fires; they let it burn, and the Oregon Department of Forestry, they're really the friends of the timber industry, and they get those fires out right away. You guys are just sitting around making up some environmental impact statements or something. So I just wanted to give you a chance to dispel this, because we heard earlier, well, maybe there's no forest fire fighting in wilderness areas, and you can't use aerial craft in fighting those fires, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we're...
So you're just sitting around making the EISs and...
No, we do have people doing that, but we also have we have a lot of fire resources.
Yeah.
You know, we jump fires in the wilderness, we repel fires, we use bucket drops. Generally, when a crew is going into the wilderness, I automatically give them the authority to use chainsaws so they don't have to use crosscuts. So, you know, they need to have the tools available to them to be successful.
Yeah.
And, you know, we partner up with ODF a lot too. They come help us on our fires and we go help them on their fires. So
Do you think last year was just an example of being overwhelmed by all these fires in one year?
Absolutely.
And what do you think is going to be kind of the longer term on this? Are we going to be prepared for those longer term, bigger events? Or do you think that with 16% of the total acreage unburned and only 5% in the severe, that represents a tolerable amount of forest fire damage?
Well, when you look at those percentages, the fire did kind of help us last year. So these acres that burned at the moderate, low, and unburned, well, unburned can still burn now, obviously, but, you know, those acres aren't going to be as receptive to fire this year. So
Why
but
are
there's
the
still a lot
unburned
of
acres added to the areas that are burned?
Pardon?
Why are the unburned areas added to the areas that are burned?
Because
Why wouldn't that be,
we need to know within the fire perimeter
okay?
how much actually didn't burn.
So the fire perimeter determines where the fire is, but the fire isn't everywhere within the perimeter?
Correct.
Okay,
It's a mosaic.
good. Is there anything that we can do in local government to either get out of your way or help you?
Really promote fire-wise concepts with local property owners, so their properties are in a lot better shape in case fire does threaten their home.
Do you know the status of Lane County's Firewise program?
I don't, not right
Okay.
off the top of my head. I know it's active.
Okay, thank you.
So the Firewise program's funded out of the Secure Rural Schools Title II or Title III? Title III.
Title III.
Yeah. So the fact that we got re-up of that funding this year, it'll continue for at least another 2 years, but it was getting ready to end as we were spending out the last of the SRS Title III funds. We do have an active active Firewise program here through our Public Works Department. And, you know, homeowners have to come in and apply, but we do also do a lot of promotion of the program for people to come in and apply for the grants. We've done, you know, tree clearing along driveways so you guys can, you know, get up to the houses, let alone defensible space work and roofing change outs, et cetera. All the things that are typical. So we do have a very active Firewise program.
That's great.
So I have one last question for you. The 80 million board feet, one of the things about the Siuslaw, you know, they're mostly doing thinning contracts now, but and almost all of their contracting stewardship. What percentage of your contracting stewardship contracting?
This year, probably 15% ballpark, 15% at
A lot
80.
better than Siuslaw because they're well over 50%.
I thought they were 50% stewardship, 50% regular timber sales,
Yeah.
somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah, because one of the things, for those that don't know what's the difference between stewardship and regular contracting, stewardship, the funds stay within the U.S. Forest Service and are used, for on the forest for various projects. They don't come to the schools and our county road fund like they normally would. So stewardship contracting benefits the Forest Service, but doesn't benefit what had been the traditional partners in the harvest, as far as the split of the receipts of the harvest. Even though there's even in a regular harvest split of the receipts, there's still a portion that goes back to the Forest Service for management and roads, et cetera.
Sure.
So, and the reason some of the ways it comes to our road fund is our roads access the forest and all that. So stewardship kind of takes away from that benefit to the state and the local school system, so and the road system. So I'm always wary to see how much stewardship contracting a forest is using. 15%, not too bad. Love to almost see it as zero. It's one of those rules that I wish could be pulled back in some ways. That's where the whole fire borrowing impacting those projects that should have been being done anyway. You wouldn't need the stewardship, and at least we fixed the fire borrowing hopefully this year in Congress. So
2020. It kicks in 2020.
doesn't kick in till then. Gee. Yeah, that's Congress.
Chairman Bosevich, I'd love to talk to you offline about stewardship contracting and all the pros and cons, but
Yeah.
obviously we don't have time today, but I'd love to talk to you about it.
Yeah, just had to throw that out there a little bit.
Sure.
Because it's one of my long-running bugaboos is watching, because of course, my district, I've got the Sayusaw, and they're much heavier users of stewardship. Not to mention most of because they're all late succession reserve.
Or riparian.
Yeah, they're doing all sorts of thinning, but they're not doing a lot of actual harvest. And so eventually they're going to run out of harvest.
Yep.
So, well, thank you for your time and your patience and for being the guy in the green shirt today. And I really do appreciate what you guys do. And you're doing the best you can sometimes with the tools and the rules that you're given. So really appreciate the work you guys do.
Well, thanks for having me today, and I'll be back whenever you want me.
Great, thank you.
you.
So from here, we'll move on to item 8A, which is discussion of an update on homeless shelter programs and shelter feasibility analysis. And I believe we have Steve Manella. And Karen, you're not going to come to the table? Okay.
Good morning, Commissioners, Chair Bosevich. I'd like to introduce to you Alex Dreyer, who is our Human Services Supervisor. And she's going to share in this presentation to update you on shelter in Lane County. So we're going to go through shelter, the point in time count. We're going to talk about some of the alternative shelters, the River Road Santa Clara project, and then
it's not on this laptop. Maybe it's in the recycle bin. Diana emailed me and said it would be on this laptop, our presentation. What's today? 5/23?
while we're looking for the presentation, I'll go ahead and start giving you an overview. The Department of Health and Human Services and the Human Services Commission and Poverty and Homelessness Board work tirelessly on homelessness and on affordable housing. As the board is aware, through most recently our conversations at the Budget Committee, the situation in Lane County and on the west coast of the United States is severe in regard to the shortage of available housing, not only for the population that we serve at Health and Human Services, but for all housing sectors in the community. And, this creates a situation where we have this compression where for the folks that we work with, the availability of housing now is such that the cost of housing has gone up. And whatever we do is hampered by just the availability of housing in the private sector. So what we're going to present to you today is, some of the work that we're doing as Lane County as a government interjurisdictionally with the City of Eugene, City of Springfield, and then also talk about the importance of partnership with the private sector in trying to create solutions. So this is the update on the homeless shelter and shelter feasibility analysis. And Alex is going to talk to you more about the shelter feasibility analysis when we get into the presentation.
Steve, may I just give one umbrellaing comment, and that is that I think the statistics are more than 60% of Lane County renters are cost burdened on their rent, which really is the analysis of how poorly we are doing or have been doing historically in providing enough homes in Lane County.
Yeah, well, I think in Lane County in the city of Eugene, we have around 36% of the renters who are paying more than 50% of their income for housing. Historically, it has been thought that 30% of your income for housing was a reasonable amount of a household's budget.
Is this aimed at affordable housing, or is it aimed at homelessness, or is it aimed at both? And if it is it divided in terms of percentages, mostly homeless or mostly affordable?
The presentation we're going to give to you today is going to be focused on homelessness and on homeless shelter, but it's going to touch on supportive housing and affordable housing as part of the solution. So the key strategic initiatives that the board has identified for us is affordable housing and homeless initiatives. And we're very pleased to see that with the new strategic plan that the housing issue has rose to the level it has of consideration.
And I'm going to talk to you about this year's point-in-time count. The point-in-time count is an annual survey of the people experiencing homelessness who are unsheltered and sheltered in our community. It is a requirement to receive funding from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, as well as state funding from OHCS. It's required that we do one every other year, but the trends are so important that we conduct the point-in-time count every year in Lane County. So here you can see the the total number of people experiencing homelessness on January 31st, 2018 was 1,642. Of those, 1,135 people were unsheltered, and 713 were chronically homeless. We conduct the point-in-time count the last Wednesday of January to understand the trend year over year of people who, in the depths of winter, are unable to access a social support network and help themselves out of homelessness. This year, we saw an unprecedented level of community engagement in the point-in-time count. We had double the number of volunteers helping collect surveys for the unsheltered count compared to previous years. So that was totaling 300 individuals who helped us collect the surveys of people experiencing homelessness who are unsheltered. In addition, at the Human Services Division, we had additional enhancements in how to conduct the surveys. So we had an electronic app that people could use to collect surveys on their mobile telephones, whether you're connected to the internet or not. We also coordinated with local law enforcement agencies, the sheriffs and cities, to map where individuals are camping and hotspot locations, so we knew where to target and send volunteers to collect surveys. The sheltered, Another important finding that we found this year is the number of households of children only, so that's unaccompanied minors under 18, doubled this year compared to last year. So we counted 25 households of children only compared to 11 last year. And we know that the school system counted 2,450 homeless students attending public school during 2016-2017 school year, and the school system counts in youth who are staying with family, friends, couch surfing, and doubling up. And when we count for the unsheltered survey, we do not count people who are couch surfing or staying with friends. Here's a look at the trends year over year of our sheltered and unsheltered homeless population. So the unsheltered is in green, and we see the individuals who are in emergency shelter are in blue, and transitional housing are in red, and it's 95 this year. We are seeing that we are overall affected by the West Coast and nationwide trends. Our population is growing, but the rate of housing being built is not keeping up with population size. We have increasing rents while wages are not rising at the same level. We have a low vacancy rate, which means that landlords can be very selective as to who they rent to, and this can eliminate people from being able to rent because they have prior evictions on their records or other barriers to housing. Here we can see the number of people experiencing chronic homelessness. Note that chronic homelessness is defined as people with a long-term disability and more than 12 months of homelessness in the last 3 years, or 4 episodes of homelessness in the last 12 months. So this population, while it is increasing, the percentage is staying around 40% every year of people. The total people who are experiencing homelessness, 40% of them are chronically homeless. Here you can see the homeless households with children. We actually saw a decrease in our count, which contrasts with the increase in demand for our winter seasonal shelter opportunities for families that we saw last winter. And the homeless households with only children was a drastic increase compared to the last 2 years. We have seen an increase in the number of people experiencing homelessness who report substance abuse as an issue that is keeping them from becoming housed, as well as mental illness. The number of people with long-term disabling substance abuse increased over the past 2 years from 16% to 25%.
Service population. At Lane County Human Services, we served over 53,000 people last year, and that's with all of our social services. And of the 53,000 people we served, over 15,000 of them were homeless some point in 2017. The year before, it was around 12,500. What this shows is that there is a high level of housing instability among a group of people in our county. If you look closely at the 15,000 people who experienced homelessness sometime in the year, during the last year, what you find is that 70% of them are living at 50% of the federal poverty level, so they're very low income. They have, there's a larger group of disabled people than in the general population. And then most of the other folks are employed, but the employment is not year-round employment. Only about 15% of those 15,000 people have a year-round job at a low wage. The other folks are working seasonally, but most of them are employed. So overall, we have system performance measures. There was a presentation that Commissioner Bosevich heard yesterday at our Human Services Commission, and Commissioner Farr has seen this information. And we look at the overall system that we have in the county with our public and private partners in affecting homelessness. And one of the measures that we look at is whether or not we can reduce the length of time that people are homeless. Again, it's about the housing instability. Can we have homelessness be less frequent? Can we decrease the number of families or the number of people who are first-time homeless? And so you see those two indicators are in red. In both cases, during the past 12 months, we've had an increase in the average length of time that people are homeless. It's taking longer to get into housing for folks who have housing resources. And we've seen an increase in first-time homelessness. The good news is that a lot of the initiatives that we've funded with federal, state, and local funds have been effective. For folks enrolled in our housing programs, we've seen an increase in employment and income growth. Some of that may be due to the the improving economy. And then we've seen that of the folks that we're putting in permanent supportive housing, we've had about 95% of them stay in that housing post program. So those are both very good indicators. Recently, we partnered up with the City of Eugene on a public shelter feasibility study. This is also the first portion of it is a systems analysis. We contracted with Technical Assistance Collaborative, and they have over 25 years of experience in working in this field. The analysis that they're doing is very important because there's a lot of discussion about the need for additional shelter. But when you think about it, you have to look at the numbers and you need to say, well, how large a population do we need to be sheltering? You saw from the pit count the number of people who were unsheltered on a given night. So that's one way of looking at it. What TAC is really going to do is look at the hydraulics, the population growth, the immigration, sort of the flow of people becoming homeless in the community. A good example is with our veterans population. We've had a veterans initiative, and we've successfully housed almost 700 veterans since we began that project. But what you see over time is that there's a new group of veterans who appear that are homeless and need housing. So it's really a flow-through system, and that's why you have to look at the emergency side of this system.
The purpose of the study is not just to analyze our capacity and what might go into a public shelter, but also to better understand our entire system, how it works, where people get stuck, so that we can make an overall system improvement. They're also going to analyze the financial and policy context, where our funding comes from. We do know that we have diverse funding streams that we braid. Some of those are ongoing, some of those are one-time funding streams. They are going to create a product for us that we can utilize over time to create a lot of strategic decisions, as well as inform our staff proposal. So just a little bit more information about Technical Assistance Collaborative. We are working with Gina, Shaq, and Liz, whose last name escapes me. They both have a lot of experience working with continuums of care, community action agencies. They actually have provided technical assistance from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They're based in Boston. They have over 25 years experience. Most recently, TAC has helped with OHCS's state plan. So they're familiar with what's going on in Oregon and the trends statewide. Here is a look at our timeline for the public shelter feasibility study, which can also be found at our website, lanecounty.org/shelter study. So in April, May, which is what they're currently doing, they had a site visit, and they are currently looking at all of our data. We gave them access to Service Point, and so they can look at the aggregate data of what's going on in our community. They are interviewing key stakeholders and conducting a gaps analysis to look at our strengths and where we could improve. For the month of June, they will be working on a system map, so helping us visually represent and understand how our system is functioning, where people come in, where people get stuck, what's working well, strengths, gaps, and needs. And then in July, they will be here in Lane County to present the systems analysis report. They will be presenting that at a joint Human Services Commission and Poverty and Homelessness Board meeting in July. So the little document shows when we get a report from them. In August, they'll be working on impact projections, so they're going to do a cost-benefit analysis based on different intervention strategies and scenarios. And another interesting thing that they're going to do is look at if you house or if you shelter a certain number of people, how many units of permanent supportive housing would you need to build, or transitional housing would you need to build to ensure that the shelter itself is not the destination, but people are moving out and into permanent housing, which is our goal, is to actually permanently house people. Then in September, we'll have the preliminary shelter recommendation report, and we will have time to present that to the community through the Poverty and Homelessness Board and other community meetings so that we can revise it. And by December, we'll have the final report that we can begin making recommendations on. So their recommendations are considering the nuanced things that are going on in our community. They're going to be looking at what target population would a public shelter serve, co-location of services and integration, what services should be at a shelter site or any other site to make it most effective. They're going to analyze our coordinated entry system to see if we can improve upon it, other operational policies, staffing, and analyzing our utilization rates of our current resources and how we can improve upon them, and overall tell us the impact that a shelter would have on our overall system. Their first site visit was April 18th and 19th, and they attended the Poverty and Homelessness Board meeting where they were able to break the group into focus groups. They met with a lot of stakeholders during that time. Their preliminary findings based on their first visit here was that we have a very high unsheltered count for our population size. In 2016, we compared the point-in-time count averages across the nation, and we had the second highest unsheltered count for similar population sizes across the United States, second only to Honolulu. They noted that we have a high level of volunteer and community engagement. They were really surprised at the number of community advocates who consistently come to our Poverty and Homelessness Board meetings. They were surprised at the level of engagement of the Poverty and Homelessness Board itself and the high level of stakeholders that we have at those meetings who consistently attend and are engaged in our conversation to address poverty and homelessness. And so they noted that we have a high political will and a lot of community engagement, which we saw in the point-in-time count with the level of volunteers who came out to help with that important data source. Here's a list of some of the stakeholders they spoke with when they visited here. We are coordinating so that they can gain a myriad level of perspectives in our community, which ranges from people with lived experience, service providers, community advocates, elected officials, and even police, law enforcement, parks department staff. Are there any questions about the public shelter feasibility study?
Just one real quick. On one of the first slides, there was an acronym for COCs.
COCs, Continuums of Care.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure public knew what that was.
Right.
Commissioner Farr?
Thank you for bringing that up. I just wanted to mention regarding the TAC, I had a chance to meet with them individually, Liz Stewart, by the way. You know, the thing that impressed me the most about them, you know, they're doing a study for us, and I'm looking forward to the outcome, looking forward to the work. They seem very thorough. But they pointed out something that you mentioned slightly, is that they were very impressed with the level of involvement of the members and the fact that everybody seemed to be deeply involved. And they talked about not seeing anything quite like it in any other area that they've studied. So just pointing out that the work that you are doing with the PHB and driving that forward and really broadening the impact in the community really continues to astound people outside of our county borders. So, Alex, thank you.
Commissioner Sorensen?
Thank you. Could you go back to the timeline of what they're doing? They're coming out, I believe you said in July?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you know if the Housing Policy Board is part of that briefing? You said they were giving a briefing to the Lane County Health and Human Services
The Human Services
Human
Commission.
Service Commission and the Poverty and Homelessness Board.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if they were also going to be briefing or if the Housing Policy Board would be invited to this meeting or something where the group that's been involved in housing issues in addition to those other groups, but their name is Housing.
Yes. Yes, the Housing Policy Board is on the list of stakeholders. As part of the overall study, there are really 3 phases and 3 visits. And so on the next visit, we can coordinate with the staff at the City of Eugene and see that the Housing Policy Board also is involved in the process. The other piece will be when they come back in September with their recommendations. They'll be interviewing elected officials and key administrators for the cities and the county as part of the analysis once they have a series of recommendations and insights to sort of see where people are in relationship to those ideas.
So the short answer is no, they're not involved in the July visit, but they might be involved in a later visit.
They could be involved. It's a work in progress. We took your note, and we have a team. We meet with City of Eugene staff and working in tandem on this. So
we can invite the Housing Policy Board members to that meeting. It's a meeting that's open to the public.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on that?
All right, then I will go into our winter strategies. First, I'll talk about what we did the last winter, so that's November 2017 through March 2018. November through March, we had an expanded Dusk to Dawn program, which is alternative shelter, a low barrier alternative shelter, and St. Vincent de Paul has the contract for that. So last winter, we had 120 shelter beds. That was 80 set aside for single individuals and 40 individuals in families. So the site for families could serve 40 individuals. Previous to that, we only funded 60 individuals in Dusk to Dawn, so we were able to increase the capacity this last winter. For the month of March, the City of Eugene provided additional funding to increase the Dusk to Dawn singles site to 95 individuals. The singles site was located on Highway 99 across the street from the Lindholm Center, so individuals were able to receive services during the day at the Lindholm Center and then transition to sleeping at Dusk to Dawn at night. So that was a smooth transition, co-locating those services. Total 52 family members were served with the Dusk to Dawn family member site, and 233 individuals were served at the singles site. Last winter, we also had 10 safe parking spots, so those are sanctioned parking spots where people who can live in their cars. Those are housed at Lane County Behavioral Health in the parking lot. Those were open last winter, and we also funded Egan Warming Center, which served 1,625 individuals during 22 nights of activation. Note that Egan activates when the weather is projected to be 30 degrees or below, and often those nights of cold come in clusters. So last winter, early in the season in November, Egan activated for 10 nights straight, where they saw a high level of community engagement and commitment, since Egan is reliant on volunteers to staff all of their sites, but also you saw a great level of fatigue after people were volunteering for 10 nights straight. Egan volunteers are very dedicated to the cause. Last year, we also had safe parking programs. Safe parking program served 21 people. 100 people were served in the overnight parking program in Eugene and 9 in Springfield. 801 men stayed at the Eugene Mission last winter, and 215 women were served at the Eugene Mission. We also started the River Road Santa Clara parking program pilot, which began January 2018, so that's a year-long pilot. And while we had some preliminary sites identified for the River Road Santa Clara pilot, because of the patchwork of unincorporated areas and city property, some of those preliminary sites we identified actually ended up being in the City of Eugene, so we're not eligible for the pilot program. let's talk about what we plan for this winter. It seems like it's early to plan for winter, but we always plan ahead. So this coming winter, Lane County passed a budget to enhance Dusk to Dawn this upcoming winter. This year's budget includes funding for Dusk to Dawn singles site throughout the season for 95 singles, and it extends the season to April 28th rather than ending at the end of March. It also adds funding for a housing navigator who would be staffed through St. Vincent de Paul because they hold the contract. So the housing navigator would work with the people who are in Dusk to Dawn, the singles site, while they are having a level of stability, having a place to stay at Dusk to Dawn. They're going to help them find permanent housing solutions. We're going to continue the 10 safe parking spots at Lane County Behavioral Health, continue with Egan. We have plans to meet with St. Vincent de Paul to streamline the volunteer training process and their safety protocols. And we will continue the overnight parking program and the River Road Santa Clara program pilot, which will end at the end of December.
Any questions on the winter strategies, the previous slides?
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. Just mentioned that at the Budget Committee meeting last Thursday night, the Budget Committee unanimously approved the extension or the $38,000 to fund the Winter Strategies Program, and which increased it to 95 beds from 80 last year. We funded for 80 initially, and it also increased funding for the navigator, the homeless navigator. And we're still waiting for the City of, I've been gone for a couple of days, so City of Eugene's budget process is still working through at this point.
They meet on Wednesdays. They have 2 more budget committee meetings. I think they're taking motions beginning this tomorrow. And so we expect a motion to be made tomorrow in support of the Dusk to Dawn program in their budget process.
And the City of Eugene's been a great partner in Dusk to Dawn. Thank you.
Commissioner Soares?
Back to the TAC and their process, they're coming out twice. I got it 3 times. And that would be in July,
In September.
and
They already came in April.
they already came. So they're coming 2 more times. Okay. So if we wanted to do more, what would be your recommendation of what we would do? In other words, these numbers all can be multiplied by 10. They can all be subtracted by 10. So in other words, if we wanted to do more, what would be your suggestion?
You just helped us out going to the next slide, because the Poverty and Homelessness Board adopted a strategic plan that, based upon the numbers that we've looked at, we've suggested that there's a need to create 600 additional units of permanent supportive housing. That's permanent supportive housing for folks that have special needs, behavioral health needs, substance abuse issues. Also, in that plan, 300 additional emergency shelter beds, 120 of those being seasonal. Now, what the TAC study is going to show is it's going to show whether or not our analysis is correct or if it needs tweaking. But the thing that we do know is that given the slow pace of construction of new affordable housing, that we're going to have people who need shelter, for some time to come. To give you an example of these numbers, just in the Eugene-Springfield area, with the efforts of the City of Eugene and Springfield in their home program, working with the state of Oregon, during a 10-year period, they completed 500 units of affordable housing. So you see, trying to create in a 5-year period 600 units of supportive housing is a very heavy lift. So something needs to happen We have things that we recommend that we do here at the local level, but of course, this is going to require, both federal and state policy changes in order to ramp up and address this issue. It's akin to, the way I think about it is that when I started working on the community health centers of Lane County, we had 65,000 people who were uninsured and didn't have access to health care. Now between Medicaid expansion and the community health centers of Lane County, we have many fewer people, but that's an example of the kind of federal and state and local partnership that it takes to move these big issues.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Farr.
Ever so briefly on that, as we move forward with some of the bullet points that you've outlined here, it's important to note that we do have a strategic planning committee surrounding the Commissioner Sorensen, surrounding the points that you're talking about how do we equitably spread the housing, shelters, et cetera, throughout the community, and how do we get people involved at a level where they've never been involved before. That is really, seems to me, a large part of the uphill battle, much as you did with FQHCs, Mr. Manella, getting more people understanding the need, and then therefore becoming a partner in the need. So, thank you.
So again, homelessness is a multidimensional issue, and in order to address homelessness, it requires looking at a number of different segments of the community and a number of different partnerships. And the way we've organized ourselves with the Poverty and Homelessness Board is that we have 4 subcommittees that are focusing on strategic initiatives around youth homelessness, employment of homeless persons, health care, and then shelter and supportive housing. And of note is that our youth committee has been working in tandem with 15th Night, and we worked in tandem with the City of Eugene in applying recently for a federal youth homelessness grant. Additionally, in the employment area, we're working with the Lane Workforce Partnership with Christina Payne, and we have started a couple of programs in our workforce program in the Human Services Division that are directed towards employing homeless people, and we're hoping to do more in that area. Rick Kincaid, who you all know is our medical director for the Community Health Center. He's been taking leadership in a work group that is working on healthcare, and we're very excited that he's going to be coming back with some recommendations from the work group. And our partnership, Housing as Health, is a very viable strategy to engaging the healthcare sector in partnering with us and providing resources and addressing the housing need of these populations. And then finally, the Shelter and Supportive Housing Work Group, and that work group is chaired by Commissioner Farr, and Mayor Venice is also a member of that work group. And that's really, that work group is really focusing on developing additional units of both shelter and housing, as well as community involvement strategies. And then finally, this is part of our vision. You all, as part of the Budget Committee, approved a housing improvement plan for permanent supportive housing. And as a part of both our county strategic plan and the strategic plan of the Poverty and Homelessness Board, this project, the MLK Housing First project, is really our first endeavor into our initiative to create those 600 units of permanent supportive housing. And I'm personally very excited because I think that the housing improvement plan resources are going to allow us to also look at the smaller communities in Lane County outside of the Eugene and Springfield area. And we've been giving thought to that because much of our efforts have been, here in Eugene and Springfield. And, one of the issues is having developable land. That's a place where the smaller communities in Lane County can really partner. And I'm looking forward to see some strategies that come out of our investment that get us into the rural communities and providing this sort of housing to our rural residents. And that's our presentation.
Any further questions or comments? Commissioner Farr.
There's a lot to say that we could spend all day talking about the efforts that are going forward. But really, the most important part of the work that we're doing is creating the partnerships and making certain that, for instance, as we mentioned at the last strategic planning meeting, making certain that the landlord are on board, for instance. But in fact, finding 600 new supportive housing units, finding a place for them in Lane County is difficult inside of urban growth boundaries because we're increasingly finding it difficult to find land to build on. Finding places for shelters is difficult because there's increasingly less open space for shelters because it is all being used for residential development. The City of Eugene chose to not expand the urban growth boundary for residential use, consequently constraining the ability to build houses. So the partnerships that we're building are really important. The work that you're doing is significant, and it's, once again, as I said earlier, becoming more and more significant and broad, the work of the Poverty and Homelessness Board. So thanks for the presentation. There's a lot to say about it, and I'm not going to belabor everyone with it at this point in time, but really the work that's being done right now is significant. Thank you.
Well, I want to just say I'm really pleased about the feasibility analysis that's being done and the looking to see what our best return on investment and whether we're making a balanced investments in some of our homeless strategies. I think it's really important to look at, do we have that transitional housing and do we have the more permanent housing and all that as we move people out of homelessness, that we have a place for them to go and how that whole system balances. So I'm really pleased to see that analysis being done, and I look forward to that report in June at HSC in that shared meeting with the Poverty and Homelessness Board. And I just want to make a little note that, you noted one of the indicators we're doing well with is income. I was wondering how much that might have to do with the great work of our veteran services officers in helping veterans obtain their benefits, and maybe that's some of that movement of that needle.
Yeah, I think around our Veterans Homeless Initiative, the ability of our veterans services staff to assist people in getting veterans benefits is definitely making a difference in that regard.
And maybe some of the expansion in our capacity through, was it Measure 96 that added the funding for additional?
Yeah, where we're working in tandem with the Veterans Court. And I think the interesting thing to note around the Veterans Court and the drug court and the community court at the City of Eugene, if you talk to anybody involved with any of those projects, they'll tell you, the folks that they're having the most difficulty with in achieving success are the people who don't have housing. So we know that housing coupled with those programs can create a success for our community.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Sampson.
I have a question about the way these housing services are, how people get access to these housing services. And by analogy, what I mean is when the Veterans Services Office was created, the criticism of the county was you don't have a Veterans Service Office. The veterans groups had that criticism. And so the board's response to that at the time was, well, you've got the Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs, you've got the United States Veterans Administration, so what's the role of Lane County in that? Lane County doesn't provide veterans services. And the response to that was, if we had a program that people had access to and could have someone explain to them their various rights as veterans, they're more likely to gain access to the services. Well, the result, 20 years later, phenomenal success, because now people have access to those services. And if you look at the statistics before and after, they're like night and day in terms of the number of claims that have been resolved in favor of Lane County veterans. Okay. If we wanted to do that in housing, where there's already a housing program, there's lots of housing programs. The state runs them, the federal government runs them, local nonprofits run them, Lane County runs them, and Homes for Good runs one. But still, there is still an access issue of how do people actually get into housing, and at various levels, the most dire being the winter homelessness situation. And I would argue probably the summer homelessness situation when the weather is equally damaging. So my question is there any thought as you move through your strategic plan, is there any thought to any permanent local housing referral program built on the same model as our veteran services model?
HMIS.
Thank you, Commissioner Sorensen and Chair Bozovich. We currently utilize a coordinated entry system, so Lane County subcontracts with housing providers like nonprofits such as St. Vincent de Paul, Shelter Care, and we have a front door assessment process. And once you take the front door assessment, you are added to our central wait list, and all the housing programs that we fund pull from one wait list. And the wait list is lists people based on their vulnerability so that the most vulnerable receive housing first. And the front door assessments, you can take them at a number of service providers who offer them so that there's no wrong door. It's the same assessment countywide. So individuals are added to one list, pulled from that list based on their vulnerability.
How many people are on that list?
Currently, there's around 400 people on that list.
Okay. So does that illustrate my point that there's 400 people that have filled out that form and hey, I need housing assistance? Well, your own statistics are there's thousands of people that have problems with housing. So we have 400 people that have accessed our existing system. We have 15,000, these are really big numbers, but we have 400 people that have filled out the form, and we have 15,000 people that are homeless at some point in the year. That's my point, is we're not really getting the word out to those people. We don't really have any resource for that. We don't even really know the extent to which they're really getting any help.
Yeah, I think, what you have brought up is the mismatch between what the resources are and the size of the issue that we're working with. And, the way that we're taking it on is that we're taking it on population by population, and that's pretty much the way state and federal policy work as well. There's been an uptick in Congress and at the state level in the interest of getting people who have disabilities housed and making that a priority. So the Veterans Initiative at the federal government and state government levels has been very successful. Now there's some emphasis being put on people with disabilities and prioritizing them for housing. And so very much it's being done population by population. The other piece, and we really didn't go into it in this presentation, but with a lot of family or household homelessness, what we do know is that a lot of those households, it just takes providing them some social service assistance once a year in order to make the difference in keeping them housed. And so we have, with the increase in state resources, we've increased, targeting homeless diversion, particularly for families that have kids in school or in preschool. And that's been, a highly successful strategy. Last year, 85% of the folks that we helped in the diversion program stayed housed through the year. Many of those people were facing eviction. And again, they were facing eviction not because they were bad tenants, but because, they had arrears in their rent and an inability to keep up with the financial burden of the increasing rents, which, in Lane County, have gone up in the last decade, or just in the last few years, by about 30%, the rent levels that people have to pay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Farr?
And just in addition to that is that the number of people who are living in Lane County below the federal poverty level is an illustration of the fact that we have lost a lot of manufacturing jobs. We don't have jobs that allow people to actually work at above the federal poverty level. What is it, 70-some-odd thousand people in Lane County are living at or below the federal poverty level?
Yes, it's around
So 70, and out of 360.
It's about 20% of the population in the county that live below the poverty level.
So it's a multi-pronged effort in getting people into housing, and it's going to take a lot of effort from federal government, state government, but especially locally, making certain that we're able to do the things that stimulate our economy, as is a second part of our strategic plan. It's focus on, diverse and sustainable economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I really appreciate the report today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. So with that, we'll move back to item 7A, County Administration Announcements. Mr. Mokohighsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few items here. First, a brief election recap. We had a voter turnout of 35.5%. The election will be certified no later than June 4th. On Election Day, we received 218 calls. We issued 323 replacement ballots in the office. 575 customers came into the office to vote or deposit their ballot. And there's various tasks, post-election work that are ongoing now, preparation to tally write-in names for precinct committee person positions, and 15 no candidate file positions has begun. The final staff review of unaccepted ballots prior to the list being made public tomorrow, May 23rd. Daily processing of ballots with the signature challenge or unsigned ballots, ballot envelopes. The last day to resolve those discrepancies is May 29th. So that's the elections update. I want to also share with the board, I forwarded you an email. We've scheduled 24 meetings with staff throughout the organization and in all of our departments to begin the process of formally rolling out our strategic plan. And so we've sent out email communications, but we really wanted to meet with all of our departments and our employees throughout the organization to make sure that people understand the various components of the new 3-year strategic plan, our purpose and behaviors to the specific initiatives and action areas that we've identified. Make sure that employees understand also the whys, why we're pursuing some of the initiatives that we're pursuing. So we had the first meeting yesterday with assessment and taxation employees, and it was a great discussion here in Harris Hall. The group was really attentive, asked wonderful questions on various topics, primarily around our strategic plan and the efforts there, but also questions around parking. Parking's an issue in the downtown area for employees, as we know, and that's something that we're actively working on. Questions about our bond rating and why it's important for us to have a good bond rating. Questions about health insurance and our wellness clinic. So really good discussion there, and look forward to the next 23 meetings that we have scheduled over the next few months. So I'll continue to provide you updates on those discussions. And then I just wanted to make a plug for our Live Well Center. Last week, I had the opportunity to go and do my health history, go online and do the health history form, the biometric screening. So I got the finger prick and tested glucose levels and cholesterol levels, body mass index, weight, all of those things. And then
Do they have like 0 for you on that body mass index?
No, I still have work to do, just like everybody, but I got a 30 to 45 minute coaching with Eva, the nurse practitioner. Just was really great. We've had, as we talked about during the budget process, over 50% of our employees have participated and gone to the wellness clinic. We anticipate that number is only going to rise. The feedback we've received is really great. And so it's a great facility that we're leasing there, and wonderful care from Eva and Sarah and the other staff. So I just want to encourage for commissioners and for all of our employees to continue to utilize that great asset that we have available to us. That's all I have, Mr. Chair, unless you have questions for me.
Any questions? Commissioner Farr.
Just, I was there 3 weeks ago. I had the same experience, just a really comfortable experience. There were a number of people sitting in the office, and I'm not saying that it's underutilized at this point in time, but I would love to encourage, as you just did, all Lane County employees to take advantage of it, because it is a wonderful service. Thank you.
Well, with that, then we'll move on to item 9, County Council announcements, and I assume
Mr. Dingle has no announcements today.
no announcements, other than we do have exec session this morning we need to get to. So with that, we'll move to Commissioners' business. Announcements. Any announcements from commissioners? Seeing none, then we'll move on to item B, which is Order and Resolution 1805-2205 in the matter of recognizing Matthew Jackson and Chris Young's outstanding service to the community. Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As well as you know, this is the two individuals who work for Arkland, and they ended up, there was a fire in a complex basically across the street, and they took their time during shift, during their, I think it was the shift change, but anyway, they ran over and ended up rescuing some 15 people out of the blazing apartment complex, and I think this is a great opportunity to recognize them. Excuse me, and so that's what this is about. And I believe we are scheduled for Thursday. Yep, Thursday, 5 or 5:30 to actually present certificates of appreciation to the two individuals. So, very good.
Any questions? If not, I will entertain a motion. Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I can move approval order in Resolution 1805-2205 in the matter of recognizing Matthew Jackson and Chris Young's outstanding service to the community.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Lyken, seconded by Commissioner Farr. Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you, Commissioner Lyken, for bringing this resolution up. I noticed on the Lane County webpage, I was trying to look at this.
Yeah.
And has that been corrected, do you know?
Still the same.
Okay.
I was just looking at it myself.
Yeah. And
Go into the minutes.
Yeah, it comes up, Board of Commissioners regular meeting, May 15th.
Minutes.
yeah.
It's the minutes.
Well, I'll just ask that we, in our minutes of this meeting, put more information about them so the public can see
Yeah.
why we're honoring them. And thank you very much for bringing up a resolution that honors people that have really done something good in our community.
Jones is fixing that issue as we speak, Mr. Chair.
Great. So it's been moved and seconded. Any other discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. So that moves us on to agenda team request and work session request. Any agenda team or work session requests? Seeing and hearing none, then we will go into executive session. I will note that we're probably not going to come out into public session before our lunch break, so we'll probably recess from executive session and come back out into regular session at 1:30 here in Harris Hall for our public works items. So the Board of Commissioners will meet in executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. This executive session will be held pursuant to ORS 192-6602D, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decisions will be made in executive session. And we are going to recess into executive session in the Board of Commissioners conference room in 5 minutes.